Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Perceptive Podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Blazer, and we have another developer interview lineup, or developers interview lined up tonight. My guests are developers of the upcoming real-time strategy game Line War, and they're attempting to combine various aspects of auto battlers, real-time strategy, forex, and more into a very different experience. And they're on tonight to discuss that. So please welcome from Studio Centurion, Christian and Stefan. How are you guys doing?
Hi, we're fine. Thank you.
Thanks. Very good. Thanks for inviting us. It's going to be exciting talk.
Not a problem. It's going to be a good one. I have been a long-time fan of RTSs, so it's great to hear from some developers who are trying to make a new one in the space. So, to get the ball rolling, since this is both of your first times on for these kinds of casts, could you talk a little bit about who you are and what is Line War?
So maybe I should start on that one, Stefan, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
With you.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, my name is Christian. I live in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm 44 years old, and I've been dreaming of becoming a game designer all my life, really. Well, the history of Line War is actually a pretty long one. It started like today, but 30 years back in time. It could have been in 1992, when me and my friends bought this tabletop game called Axis and Allies. So it all begins with a board game, with that board game. And I can tell you a lot about this maybe later, but this is how it all started with that board game and how we refined the board game and extended upon the rules and everything too. So somewhere along that journey came this idea of Line War into my head.
Yeah, and my name is Stefan Persson, and Christian found me actually. We live close to each other, but he found me 3 years ago, roughly. I've been creating smaller Unity games and Unity assets in the Unity Asset Store for the past 10 years. And then I make a lot of game dev YouTube videos about 3D modeling and Unity-related game development. So had a presence there, and Christian found me and contacted me and was excited to try to find someone to team up with and create a new game. And I was just about... I paused my day job as an IT security consultant, and I thought this sounded really, really exciting. So he sold the idea to me, and here we are, just heading towards the release now of our first RTS game. So,
in our first meeting, I brought the board games with me, the Strategica board game, which the next version was called from Axis and Allies. So. I brought them with me and showed to Stefan, and I managed to persuade him into this crazy project.
So, what is Line War for the people watching us recorded right now?
So I would say Line War is really, truly a mix of many different genres, but the most notable one is, of course, RTS. But it also has very strong elements from many other genres, especially 4X, I would say. When we talk about Auto Battler with Line War, I think we're mostly referring to the fact that AI takes over the nitty-gritty parts and much of the micromanagement. So it's really a game about strategy, and I know many RTSs claim that it's all about strategy, but I think many people playing this game finds out pretty soon that strategy really pays off. You can have a good strategy from the beginning, and maybe your execution wasn't perfect, but you followed your strategy from the start to end, and that gave you the victory. So it's played out on a planet, a typical rectangular map, which is procedurally generated and can be randomized.
Nice.
Yeah, there are a few things that really got me interested as well to get to jump on this journey. I've played a bit of RTS in the past, of course, ever since Command and Conquer, or a little bit before that as well, but also through StarCraft. And I didn't get enough finger dexterity to become proficient in those type of games. And also, I couldn't really get used to the different factions and how you could counter between them. So when Christian presented to me with these the game boards, but also a presentation where there was like a world with imagine like a World War II map or something with all these different defense lines and paths and arrows, and he said you draw these things and the units will follow, so you can express your strategy that way. So that one really got me sold on joining in, and that's, I think, still what's really setting the game experience apart. So it's fun that we can play and have the matches play out in so many different ways. And the bonus with the procedural worlds is we also didn't want to go for a mirrored or a four-cornered mirrored world. So they're procedurally generated and also asymmetric. So every play experience could be very different. So, and we'll probably get into some of the challenges that came from a game design and gameplay and balancing perspective. So we'll probably touch on that at some point.
Mm-hmm. One of the design goal pillars of Lineware is really to make it as efficient as possible to for the player to express his strategic intent in terms of these commands, and we will improve on them going forward. So we're not finished yet, but it's already quite efficient. But this is the primary goal of the design when controlling your units. We always think from that angle and that perspective to make it as efficient as possible to express my strategic intent. Mm-hmm. And that is not accomplished by drag selecting units or selecting individual units with micromanagement a la StarCraft style. So that's what we call indirect unit control or command-centric unit control.
And that is very interesting. As both of you were talking, I was looking at the store page for Lineware, and I see the whole section about visual commands. And yet that's definitely a different take on kind of RTS controls. Like for people, well, for my fans, like they know I've been playing RTS games since the original Command & Conquer as well. I played CNC, Dune, Warcraft, even going to like when we got to play the tactical style with Company of Heroes, Dawn of War, and then we go like complete opposite direction with Macro, with Supreme Commander, Planetary Annihilation, and I'm sure you guys are no stranger just how micro-intensive RTS games got, like probably like around like maybe like the early 2000s and maybe into like early mid 2010s. Like just as like the RTS genre kind of shrunk in favor of focusing on the MOBA style.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that's. To be able to play a strategy game in that sense, the visual command system, even though there are a lot of other elements that make it very different, I think that is what definitely does set it apart. And it's been quite difficult from a design or a mechanics perspective, because drawing some of the commands, when we run into issues on how to solve them, there's nothing to really lean back on to say, oh, well, that game solved it this way or this game solved it that way. So we've had so many challenges where we come into situations where we go, okay, we know we always, like Christian said, we have our strategic goals or intents or design pillars that we want to try to achieve, that you never select an individual unit. And we've tried to stay true to that as much as possible. So we have to just find different, how do we know what the player wants to express with his visual commands without making it complicated in a different way. So it's definitely been an exciting but not a straightforward journey. So it's been really fun as well to release since the Steam Next Fest, to have a lot of players give the feedback on the system. And that is really something that is shining through the feedback now, that's something that people really actually do appreciate. So we're really excited about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the whole control style of RTS games, I mean, we could probably spend an hour or two just on that one topic alone, because it is a very unique element of the RTS genre. It's one that I think has, in a way, been one of the reasons why it's been so downplayed over the past decade, because it is very intensive to play. Like, for myself, like a few friends and I, we tried to play like games like Rise of Nations and Age of Empires online, and like that to me is kind of like the extent of like my macro and micro ability. I try to play StarCraft, and my brain just cannot keep up with all the hotkeys and commands I'm trying to do. And then conversely, we have something like Planetary Annihilation, where that game is super macro, where you are in just a constant focus on all aspects. And I guess with Line War, what has been kind of like your methodology in terms of how much, I guess like finger power or muscle power do you need to be able to play this game versus, again, like the strategic layer and being able to make a plan and have that come through versus, again, high APM?
So I think still, unfortunately, still Stefan and I are the two best players of Line War, but there are thousands upon thousands of people playing this game now. So we have a very, very deep leaderboard, and the best players right now start to beat us. But I can, in all honesty, I can tell you that when I play at my best in Line War, I'm much more calm and think through what I do. I don't spread commands all over the map, but I place them with some carefulness. And this is so I would say when I play at my best, my APM is almost lower than when I get stressed and when I lose confidence. I think that's you share that experience.
Yeah, 100%. I think definitely, especially in the beginning, I was drawing many more commands and trying to do things. But just stepping back and analyzing, reading, and trying to figure out, you don't see the enemy's commands, but you sort of see what the troops are doing and what type of units are coming, how far do they have, what's happening elsewhere on the map. And then it's much better to analyze it, think through. And then it's a bit like we compare it sometimes to chess, drawing, like moving a piece isn't that, problematic. But thinking about where to move it, first of all, that's the key thing. So for sure, there is a slight bit of... when it comes to, like, you're probably more effective if you use the hotkeys to set what type of commands or units should be responding to some of the commands. But we also see that a lot of players that do really well are still using the mouse to click on the menu bar and select everything, whereas we probably tend to use the hotkeys a little bit more for convenience and speed. But it's definitely not one of the things. You should also mention, I think, that the game speed, a lot of people that see the game for the first time, they react on the movements of the units are quite slow, especially compared to a lot of other quick RTSs. But also the same people, that sort of feedback dampens down fairly quickly when they start to play, because the map is a little bit bigger. It spans beyond the camera view, and then maybe you have 2, 3, 4 different confrontations at the same time, where you have to assess your commands, come back, redraw them, change them, switch a defense line into engage or something, and then go somewhere else. So it's quite good that the unit speed isn't faster than it is, because the brain brain has a lot of processing to do.
Yeah. Actually, there's another question I want to ask you guys. In terms of, like, inputting command to the actual units performing it, is it a delay or is it instantaneous? Like, the second I draw this line, the unit will just immediately start going?
Every command attracts at most 5 units per second. So that's the rule we're using right now, and it's not a very intentional design decision. It just came to be that way. But so they do not respond immediately unless there are only 5 units responding. So there are very, very little opportunities for micromanaging, but they do exist in small skirmishes at the beginning stages of the game. In early game, you have these skirmishes in forests between small numbers of infantry, maybe 3, 4 infantry, and then you could benefit from sort of moving these move points around and switching them to engage when your infantry happens to be in a position versus their infantry, that they can surround them a little bit, and then you get 3 hitting 1 and things like that. But you can't continue focusing on such petty details when the game develops. Then I'm pretty sure you would lose. You have to zoom out and think about the strategic situation and what is building up on the map, and what you know and what you probably don't know, and angles of attack and flanking and setting up the defenses and things like that. So very, very little opportunities for winning by micromanagement.
So I was looking on the store page in terms of, I guess, like unit diversity. You're going for, it looks like a fairly small pool of units. Could you talk a little bit about like kind of like what is like the army, I guess, composition for Line War?
So it's land-based units, sea-based units, and air-based units. So it's very classical in that way, and the look and feel of the units is sort of a mix from World War II era up to modern warfare today. So that's the mix of units, and then you have the regular buildings that is producing them, and then you have this very, very, very important concept of capital and energy. So those are the only two resources in the game. And energy is super distinct. The purpose of energy is to propel all air units, all sea units, and also tanks. And the rest of the land units, which are only infantry, commando, SAM, and artillery, they don't need energy to move. They are very slow. So you know very well from these simple rules what will happen to your enemy if you manage to strike at their energy depots and energy producers like the refineries and the power plant. So we have been discussing earlier in the game development whether we should introduce a small energy cost to artillery and SAM, for example, driven mostly by realism, but that would only serve to make it less distinct, the very concept. So it's very important, and it truly works. You have like chessmate situations where one player who is has much greater economy, much more capital, is brought down by a much smaller player that manages to take out all energy, and the Armada and the Air Force and the tanks just stop in their tracks, and you can go around them and take out buildings and conquer the world while your enemy's army is like standing still.
Yeah.
And that has happened to me like much more often. That's why Stefan is laughing.
I was going to say, yeah, you could. Some of my favorite moments is actually when you do, when you know that you're economically under, but you can coordinate the attack and knock out the energy, and the units sort of bob, and you get these smoke puffs, so you know that that it was really effective, and then you have a window where you can really strike back at them. And I think when it comes to the unit types and also the simplicity in resources, we've been discussing that a lot, and I think a common thing would be to think of it like creating a new RTS. So we need to have 3 factions, 5 factions, or we need multiple races. We need so many different units. We want to have customizability. We want to be able to drag and drop technologies onto specific slots and stuff. We want to have different resources, and we all the time we come back to the core thing. We want to have a game that's really easy to learn, but it has so much strategic depth in it. So you know what the units are capable of. You know when you hear the tanks, you know that what strategically you need to pull back. You can't really be scattered. You'll be vulnerable, and that sort of simplicity of the units and resources really caters for the strategic growth, I think, of playing the game. And there are so many different outcomes that could come. And we often speak about a specific game very long, half an hour or something after we played, or even an hour sometimes. Remember that when that happened or this happened. And I think it works good from that perspective, that you really understand what the units are. They have a really distinct role and purpose, all of them.
Mm-hmm. So with kind of like the inspirations from like the auto battler, and again being able to command units and use the visual commands to send them out, how much does like I guess the unit itself kind of plays? Because when we talk about like the auto battler genre, it's very much just put these lines out, units will do their thing, and then your hands are kind of tied, or your hand they're your hands up, you're done. For a lot of real-time strategy games, as we all know, for more that are on the micro-intensive side, battles can be win or lost based on how quickly someone can, quickly move their units around or properly time a special ability. With Line War, I guess, once, like, I guess units are engaged, once we have, your army is fighting my army, is that like the extent of our interactions, or like what can you do during a conflict to either, tilt the scales or, move things in a different way?
Yeah, so you have all the different arms of combat. Of course, you can send in airstrikes, and you can flank your enemy, and you can spread out on a thin line to sort of encircle your enemy that way, or so you have all these things. But the command system is based on a one-size-fits-all principle right now. It might not be that way in the next generation, but right now it's something we call the command bar. And on that command bar, you have 3 directives. It is engage, move, and defend. And you combine these 3 directives with shapes, point, line, and path. And you also have the receivers, which are the type of unit that should respond to the command, potentially, that could be attracted by the command. So let's say you have, to give an example of how a combat situation could look like. So I'm setting up a line of directive defense. Then the units that I have configured for that particular defense line will walk over or go there and dig in and create entrenchments, so that defend line will have a facing, and it will be powerful from attacks coming from that angle. Then the other player could, for example, use a double laner move path with tanks to circumvent the line and come in from behind. So that's just one example. Another example could be sending artillery to start bombarding the defense line, in which case the other player, the defending player, could switch directive on the defense line to engage, which will release all units, and they will go out and confront the artillery. So I'm not sure I answered your question there, but that's one example of how combat looks like in Line War.
Okay. And I guess with like the unit diversity itself, as you guys were saying, that you didn't want to go too overboard in terms of 30, 40 different units, different factions, things that can really, obscure the strategic layer when, is his tanks different from my tanks, my infantry different from his? How did you settle on the unit list for Line War?
It's very similar to the unit list in Strategica, the board game. So it's super similar. And it's also the classic units used in modern warfare. They are recognizable, and we know their roles, and so that's I think much of the design decision comes from there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everyone, even the slightest interested in history and military history, especially, will probably have a rough understanding of the units and their role from just looking at the game. Maybe not so much at sea, because they are not as easy to distinguish. But once you know that this one is a destroyer and this one is a missile ship, then okay, the destroyer is probably pretty good against submarines. So you can draw those conclusions right away, and that has its benefits, I guess. What would you say?
Yeah, and I think even though we're settling for, maybe we still have to implement one that's actually coming after release as well, which is the carrier, which is basically like a portable airstrip. But then in terms of building on the concept, we're really going to go for technologies that will upgrade units, and we haven't decided exactly on which ones yet. But for us, it's very important with the command system. We don't really want to add even more type. You already have to start filtering in some cases. Do you want tanks to respond or not? Do you want destroyers and cruisers at sea to respond or not? So instead of adding units to make that more complicated, we really want to be able to give the player a choice to be able to evolve over the course of a game, and depending on what the opponent is like. So you can start adding technologies, and these are not finalized or anything like that yet, but just as examples, it could be the fact that maybe a tank could tow an artillery to move it faster, or it could be sonar technologies for helicopters or something. Cruise missile addition to the cruiser. So these are the type of things that the player will be able to spend their economy, and you'll still be able to see what unit it is at all cases. So even for the new players as well, it'll always be clear. But it's just that I should be aware further into the game that it could have some surprise type of ability or something that could be coming.
And we already see how that you players develop doctrines. Me and Stefan has been playing a lot the latest year, and Stefan's doctrine is almost always to create a lot of subpens and submarines combined with Air Force, and this always puts me in the same bad spot where I have to choose between destroyers versus submarines or missile ships versus air. So I have to create fleets with a mix of those two, and none of them are pretty effective when he combines the forces. So and on the other hand, I like playing with the shipyards and the surface ships, which can attack and bombard the coasts and things like that. So it goes on, and we play game after game, and just realizing afterwards that we have completely different doctrines. We approach this game from two completely different angles, and it works time after time. And now we can see these doctrines develop among the other players as well.
We've seen some of the new players that come in we have some stealth units as well. So the commando is not only does it hides better in forests and mountains, but also in plain sight. And we have, like Christian said, with the submarines that have a stealth element. And some players come in and they find something really a good way to maybe use the commandos and sneak attack and drop and conquer other parts of the world. And then it's really fun to see. We're really excited to see what other players will be able to come up with. And I think my ability of playing the game, even if we've played so much, so we're probably but it's going to be fun to see when the really skillful strategic players are coming. I think we're going to see some really good things. And we've discussed. It's actually often we just view the games. We have a replay functionality. And we've commented, done some commentary, and we also have a few players that are coming in now that are interested to analyze. And it's the beautiful thing is when the commands are visible on the video, you can see what the players are thinking. So when you toggle between the two players, you see, okay, he's drawn an attack path right there with tanks. Little does he know, in the forest, he's got like a bunch of commandos that he's going to run into. Or at the same time, you see maybe a blitz attack with a target command on 2 refineries. So you see exactly what's going to happen in about 2 minutes or 30 seconds or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good segue talking about the world generation itself or map generation. Because as you guys were saying, you're using procedurally generated maps which aren't symmetrical. And that has always been kind of like one of the bread and butters of competitive or high-level RTS, with having very symmetrical maps. All the resources over here are the same as all the resources over there. And with Line War, I guess, how does the map factor into the play of the game, considering that it is going to be procedurally generated each time?
Yeah. So do you want to take that one, Christian, or?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah. It's a combination from a gameplay and a visual perspective. We've sort of never really liked the fact that everything looks symmetrical, even if I'm a symmetrical type of person who likes everything to be symmetrical, funny enough. But from a gameplay, it's something really appealing to have. Back when you think of games like Risk or something, where there's even like a traditional world map or something, the world isn't symmetrical. So to balance that, we've been thinking hard how to do it. We really wanted to do it, and we've got a very unique take. And there's like a metagame before the game starts, and that's called the picking phase. So both players get the opportunity to select where they would like to start. So you analyze the world. Where are the resources? Where's a good expansion? Where can I capture a lot of territories? Where might be a good, strong strategic place to start? And then I click on on that territory. That's where I'm going to start. But the other player can also click, and if the other player clicks on the same or a very nearby territory, then that region gets banned, and then the picking phase continues that way. And at the end, you'll end up having maybe 4, 5, 6 different. That it's a bit difficult to determine which one, depending on your playstyle. It might be different favorable situations or positions on the map. But eventually you'll find 2 different, and you don't really know where the enemy starts, which is another, when it comes into the 4X and the exploration aspects, it's quite exciting. We often get into a situation where the center of the map or a strong region gets picked off or picked out, and then you sort of start the game and you know, okay, he could be there, or there probably, or it could also be a totally sneaky start somewhere totally different. And we've found that meta game, or the identifying a strong starting location, or maybe deliberately ensuring that the strongest region is denied from the start. That's how we've balanced it. And we're discussing whether we should have a game mode in the future where sort of big data analyzes the starters' strongest positions and pre-bans those. But we don't have any plans for that in the near. But we're playing with the idea that it could be cool to have something that's predetermined, that there are 6 locations that are a bit equally strong.
So it's a common confusion among new players with the picking phase, because many players thinks looking at the map that they have to come up with something very special and maybe try to start in a corner where there is a city where you can develop your economy and attack from there. But the point with the picking phase is to be very, very greedy and not very, very smart or clever in the beginning. Just look at the map, and it's often in the center or near the center where you can claim the map, claim the center, and expand in every direction. That's the part you have to click away. So between two professional players, it's very common to have like 2 or 3 rounds of banned territory, and after the 3rd round, these rounds pass by pretty quickly. It can take 30 seconds or 1 minute, and after the 3rd round, it starts to become more complicated and more dependent on player style, which territory will be the next. And you can imagine that the minimum range between 2 valid primary territory picks is not that far, so you could actually begin very close to your opponent and not knowing it. So there is a very, very strong metagame in the beginning, and it's also a little bit dangerous for professional players with rock, paper, scissors build orders and things. But it works. It works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's always been the other aspect of competitive RTS games, is getting those very rigid build orders set up, knowing, what strategy I'm going to do as the Terran, which strategy I'm going to do with the Zerg, and so on. And obviously, with the game being asymmetrical in terms of map design, you really can't, I guess, adhere to that. Now, regarding like rock, paper, scissors balance, does Line War have that? And if so, is it is it more on the looser side, or is it hard? As in, if my rock goes into your scissor, it doesn't matter how many scissors you have, you're done. Like, it's just gonna steamroll over it.
It's much more loose, and it's much more about an ability that the unit brings to an area, rather than that this unit has the purpose of defeating this other unit. So it's loose. It's not that strong at all. Like, destroyers are actually might get a buff in some patch, not too far away, because they are not very strong against submarines, and the submarines spot the destroyers before the destroyers spot them, which is probably not unrealistic, by the way. But so it's not like that. But you do have anti-air units. It's the SAM, the missile ship, and the interceptor, which is an aircraft, and they are of course very strong against air units, but only if you reach a critical mass. You can still strike at them hard, and then if you are on par or slightly greater in number, then you might even take down anti-air units, even though you have attack them with air. So it's loose.
And I'd say also with the game pace, the way it plays out, when you do realize that maybe you've got units that are not so good against opponents, then you have a tactical window where you can actually act. You should definitely not just say, okay, that's it, I'm going to lose, because that comes. But when you hear the torpedoes impacting, you might have an interceptor that can provide the sight, and you can come down with cruisers, and you can combine other units to create a good enough defense meanwhile. And you could also even sacrifice a few things while you're. And again, when you see a bunch of tanks coming, then there are definitely strategic and tactical operations you can do, like tightening in your defense and starting to counter-produce maybe helicopters or tanks. So, but there's definitely not no lose, as Christian said there. I haven't really felt so much of a problem with that in this game at all, even if the element is there.
Mm-hmm.
So we are also thinking with the new technologies coming to try as far as possible to avoid anti-technologies that provide this ability to this or this unit to attack the another type of unit. We're more looking into adding a special ability to one unit that gives it a new role on the battlefield. Like you could, for example, imagine one cargo hold for submarines that you can put commandos in, and then you can silently disembark them on the enemy shore, and the enemy won't see the boats, and he won't see the land units either. So it's a completely silent invasion. And this is not a capability that we have for submarines right now, but it's one of those technologies that are bound to come.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them are anti-technologies. So we're trying to avoid rock, paper, scissors as far as possible.
And speaking about technologies and kind of like how the growth or progression of a match goes, does Line War have, any, super weapons or like endgame tech? That can, whoever gets to it first has a huge advantage. I mean, we've seen this with nuclear missiles in Rise of Nations, the GDI Death Laser and all the Command & Conquers, and so on.
Yeah. So we do have the rocket right now. The technologies will also be something for the rich player, because they introduce a way to invest in your army without increasing your upkeep at the same time, because we have this system of upkeep. So every unit and every structure adds to your upkeep, and the upkeep is simply just something you have to pay every second. That takes away from your income. So at the end, you are so burdened by your upkeep if you keep producing structures and keep producing units that you no longer have any income. So that's how the upkeep system works. But responding to your question there, it's the technologies do not add to the upkeep. So even though they might be pretty expensive, and you might have like 20 or 30 to choose from, and they might cost 500 or 1,000 capital each, which is a lot in this game. You could still spend on technologies. Like now I have 5 or 6 technologies, and all technologies will have a rather strong impact. So that is one way to look at it regarding super weapons. But then we also have the rocket, of course, and the rocket is already implemented, and that is definitely a super weapon.
But at the same time, I would say that it is a super weapon in that it's really powerful and also very expensive. But we had a lot of discussions when we implemented that, because it would have been easy. We had maybe a year ago, we had a bit of an issue where the end game tended to drag out for a long time, whereas a lot of players would have maybe a big navy, but it would take time. Maybe someone would turtle up and just retract and defend itself, and you could drag out for 20 minutes or something. So the rocket was designed to really, when you have the money, you can invest in it, and you can sort of pad the way for your invasion and end the game quicker. But at the same time, we didn't want to make the rocket so expensive that it would only come in the late game, because there are options to early invest in it. But you spend so much on upkeep that it's a very risky, and it's quite destined to fail. But it is possible to buy it early on. And maybe you can have a bit of a a glorious hit with that one. That's something we see with new players. They tend to be a lot more defensive, and they create very defensive triple defense lines, and they build up a lot of economy, and then unfortunately it can end quite quickly because someone buys, I can buy 3 rockets now. Whereas when more experienced players are playing it, just buying 1 rocket, especially early to mid game, it would ruin your economy. So they're really at a certain level, maybe we say about maybe half skill level and above, then they become that accelerator, and quite cool when they start coming in, because then okay. It's time, but for new players, I think it's a bit of a problem. So we're discussing if we should have an option, but I think it really has an important role.
And it's also possible to counter the rocket. So it's considered an air unit when it's airborne. So if you can prepare yourself and put anti-air units, or maybe even send the interceptors to scramble, then you have a good chance of shooting down the rocket while in air. So that's another possibility. And you can also you might discover the launch pad of the rocket while it's building the rocket, and that's another way to destroy it before it's fired. So it's not an easy weapon to use, and we think that it's very well balanced by now.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about defense in Line War, how capable are defenses in this game? Because this is another really interesting aspect of RTS games. We've seen some games that really heavily favor the boom or turtle strategy, and then there are some games where your defenses are just merely there as more of a distraction or just a temporary holdback. You need that standing army, or you're just not going to be able to hold anything.
So the problem with the defense lines, which is the primary way of defending, if you really feel that you need to withdraw and defend, then you draw the defend line. But the problem with the defend line over large areas is that it's you will spread one. If you have we haven't mentioned this yet, but the line command, for example, can be toggled between 1, 2, or 3 lines. So you can have a triple defense line, or a single, or a double defense line. So the problem with them is that if you draw a defense line over a large area, you will still just get attacked at one point by tanks, for example. And then the rest of your army will just be sitting there doing nothing. So this happens over and over again, which means that for more experienced players, we'll put defense line a little more carefully in the sweet spots, just to block out those points of entry. It could be, for example, on a map with a lot of land, you might have a sort of a path through forest where it will be beneficial to send tanks. So maybe you're drawing a defense line to close that gap, because tanks get a huge movement penalty while moving through forests, and also firepower penalties and things like that. So by professional players, you see much more and much smaller defense lines here and there, instead of these large swipes that we see from amateurs.
Also, with the we haven't spoke about that yet, but with the terrain concept in Line War, we have plains, which is just normal, but also forests and mountains, and that affects movement speed and building construction speed. But also, when you do put defense lines, then you get a bonus for that as well. So, like Christian said, when you have a choke point in the mountains, very strategic location, then you could definitely benefit a lot from putting maybe a smaller defense line, because a couple of 3-4 artillery. The units will slow down as they approach, and they'll do a lot of damage, and most infantry can't even make it across the way there. And also having tighter defense lines maybe around your producing structures are quite good. But then again, as we say this, when a lot of the videos that we see of Line War are like triple defense line that is spanned across like an entire continent. And it's probably quite fun for a lot of people that enjoy to maybe step back and play it in that way. It has a charm to it as well, but a lot of the maybe competitive and more overall strategic players will probably use them a lot less. So
The problem is also that you always over long defense lines you always get flanked. Even if your flanks are protected, your enemy will still open a punch through at some place, and once the line is punched through, you're sort of flanked anyway. So that's one cool factor that we will improve with the AI. That is the reinforcement factor. If you do have enough land units to put up these defense lines and also have pockets of reinforcements behind them, so you can quickly move them to the area where the enemy is approaching, then today the AI is not super good at handling those situations, but you will be attacked at the defense line, the first units will fall eventually, and they will not be easily replaced by units behind them, which they should be. But you will still get this encirclement effect when they punch through the defense line and the reinforcements come in. Then you still have get this very good concave for the defender. So it works, but only if you have reinforcements. And it doesn't hurt if those reinforcements are also air units.
Speaking about air units, do air units work that they're just constantly using up energy as they're moving around, but they're like powerless when they're like at a port or at an airport, or do they always like just like stay in the air once they've been created?
So the energy works the same for all the units. While they move, they consume energy. If they are standing still, they consume nothing. So air units on standby does not consume any energy. And it's the same, you can actually build up a huge armada of cruisers, which are very expensive to relocate to another destination. And you might feel very, very powerful, but if you're inexperienced, then you haven't probably built a depot so you can bunker energy, which is required to move this fleet from one end of the map to the other. So the typical less skilled player will build like 16 cruisers and start moving them just to find that, okay, I don't have enough output.
And also about the air units, I think when they're not operating, they're landed either at an airstrip or an airport, or the helicopters, they can land anywhere in territories. That's one of their bonuses. And they can repair there, and they cannot take off unless you have the energy. And that's another, I think, people that look at them and play the game, especially early on, we've seen a lot of comments that, the air they're not good, they don't buy air units. But I think the more you play, you'll find out that they're actually extremely important, because not only they can operate in a 360-degree radius, you can send them there, you can avoid where there's missile defenses. And also they act really good to add. So if you're doing an invasion or something, being able to send those coordinated maybe interceptors to deal with the enemy aircraft and strikers and stuff to support, or bombers. So they are actually, I think, they're a key element to play with in most type of games. You'll find that air units will have a good place in there.
Yeah, and I think that's always the very interesting about like RTS games. Like when I play stuff like Age of Empires or Rise of Nations, like we basically have a rule: no naval units. Like we just are completely horrible when it comes to the naval side of things. And I know when we try to play stuff like Supreme Commander or Planetary Annihilation, it can get very overwhelming when you have 2-3 completely different unit compositions trying to organize all of them. So I guess another question I wanted to kind of clarify, or something you could clarify for me with Line War. In terms of the UI of the game itself, you already mentioned, of course, the whole visual command, being able to draw lines on the field. In terms of, I guess, like keyboard and mouse play, or just like using that kind of UI, I guess how easy is it to learn Line War? Because again, we've seen RTS games go any point of the spectrum in terms of, overwhelming the player with buttons and macros, or just the only thing you have to do is, select all units, control A over here, and that's your whole grand strategy of moving your guys.
Yeah. Well, we see it's a bit of ironic, because the core concept is quite easy, but the very first maybe 2 or 3 matches, if you drop someone into Line War, there's no other game like it, how you play it, and they haven't seen anything. It's very confusing, maybe, because they'll draw a line and what's going on? Is it a drawing program or something? But it's very not much the case. And there are literally, like Christian said, there's like the different shapes, the line, point, and paths. And then you have the directive concept, which how should they roughly act? Should they attack or should they stay back? And then it's the type of receiver. So those are the 3 core concepts. And we also have a mechanic where if you just take the mouse and draw somewhere, it'll select the most commonly used units for you. Or if you click a dot in the ocean, it won't try to send infantry there. So it's got an element of the core logic to help you along the way. But if you do spend maybe 3 or 5 minutes or something, look at the built-in video tutorials, and especially if you see someone else playing, then you can start to, okay, I'll draw a line, they'll follow, okay, they'll start to conquer if I have the engage directive, they'll put themselves on the defense line. So then you're at a point where you're pretty good. You can start playing, and we see a lot of people playing it that way. And then it's just to master it after that will take a long time, because that's when you get to a situation where you'll send one command with your main forces. Maybe you'll have a flank path with tanks, and then at the same time you activate. Maybe you pre-drawn a command already to send interceptors. So when the tanks come there, so it's like a coordinated thing that you do. So there's definitely a lot of room to start to become really good at operating those commands. But at the core, they're pretty simple that way.
Speaking about being able to pre-draw commands or have them saved, does that mean that you can kind of set up a command plan beforehand and kind of I guess save the blueprint, and then when you want, kind of just paste it on the board or paste it on the screen?
That is something that we definitely want to develop, and we already have this concept in the GDD, and we call it operations. So it's basically the more you think of it, it's basically just a grouping of commands, and the possibility to make them inactive, or even while you're recording this group of commands, have them inactive from the beginning, and then put them away for the moment, and then bring them back with the F5, F6, up to F8 key maybe. So that would be very, very cool, because you do have this need sometimes if you really want to do coordinated attacks, which this command system should be perfect for. Today you have to either there are workarounds that you can use. You can draw all these commands and deliberately configure receivers which no one will respond to, and then activate the receivers afterwards, all at the same time. So that's one workaround, but it doesn't work very, very well, and it doesn't work for all situations. So what you're describing is something that we call operations, and that will definitely be implemented in the future.
Okay.
So now instead, if you have this grand operation, maybe a typical example is an amphibious assault involving a lot of naval units, a naval bombardment. You need to sync and try to get the right timing with your aircraft, and then send the landing crafts over and get the men on board and everything like that. You have to start drawing the commands, and the units react, and you need to draw them pretty quickly if you need to get the timing right.
Mm-hmm. All right, and as a quick time check, we're about 54 minutes in. I figure maybe another 10 to 15 minutes, so that works for everybody.
Sure.
Yeah, sounds good.
Right. So in terms of one thing that I wanted to clarify for people listening to us right now, with Line War, you of course have it pitched on Steam as being a multiplayer-driven game. Is there any kind of single-player content either in it or planned?
So there's a sandbox mode right now where it's basically where you can enter the game. If you don't want to do the first thing you want to do is go into a multiplayer match. There's a sandbox, so you go in there and you control both players, so you can toggle. But it's more of it's exactly what it sounds. It's just a sandbox, so the units they'll have the built-in AI just to respond to whatever command they're following. But then we often use it ourselves a lot when we maybe do tutorials and stuff. But players, we've spoken a lot to them, and they do a lot of testing scenarios. They learn how to draw the commands. They see how does 10 infantry units when they come against 3 or 4 artilleries. How does that behave? So they can do a lot of practice, but it's not a player experience as such. Some people have creatively created a few challenges, though, like how fast can I conquer all territories? Which units? So there's, and I actually tend to like those. I jump on some of those where like. How fast can you build all cities? So there's, but there's definitely no game mode involved in it. But also, when we speak a lot about this, there are a couple of reasons why the multiplayer is so strong for us. And the first thing is we want to really get the player experience, and humans versus humans are the best to try to get that experience to see, okay, when is it perfectly balanced? When do we have all the different type of units and the technologies? And since we are only 2 developers, if we were to try to start implementing campaigns or AI skirmishes with some sort of a half-decent machine learning to simulate how people are drawing, it would not be a very good experience at this point to try for us to do that. Plus, it'll create this double work. So at some point, we're looking at after the release, at some point adding maybe some type of more of a so imagine that you have different challenges that with pre-recorded commands that are triggering. So maybe the challenge is to, with a minimum amount of casualties, attack a base or something. So, and then you could reward the player maybe based on how the performance was, how fast did they do it, what was the casualties. But we're not looking to implement any sort of a full-on AI skirmish where you play against a virtual opponent. And we often speak and laugh a little bit about this when we compare to other games like tennis or football or something like that. They're best played with other people and board games. So we really want to make Lion War a player experience where I find playing friends and playing Christians and other people that I've gotten to know, those are the best type of matches where you're balanced, you have an opponent, and you speak about it for a long time after. So our key. There are so many other player games that do single player very well in the strategy genre, but Lion War is really designed primarily for multiplayer at this point. So we'll see maybe some type of additional single player challenge modes coming at some point.
And especially, it should be mentioned in the future, maybe 1.5 year from now or 1 year from now, we could see some kind of like full-blown single-player campaigns and things like that. But it requires so many resources with storytelling and so we're waiting with that one.
All right. And I guess a question I forgot to ask you guys at the beginning: how long have you both been working on Lion War for?
So it's almost exactly 3 years from up until today. So 3 years from now, I started writing on the game design document, and I think you and me, Stefan, we started in June 2019.
I broke my collarbone just as we were going to start. Yeah. I remember. But then, and I phased out my day job, so I was working 3 to 4 days a week on Lion War from June, and then after about half a year, then we both went full time. But it's been more than full time since then. We spend pretty much, 40 to 60 hours a week usually. So it's a good thing. It's so much fun to create. But then it should be mentioned that the balancing, which is not to be underestimated, what Christian mentioned of creating the Strategica board game for the 20 years, because so many, and I've been surprised actually through the whole development process that so many things. I'll come up with an idea. Oh, how it would be cool if this unit could do that, and then usually Christian has a really good no, because then something like this would happen or something like that would happen, and a lot of that comes from all the years of playing that Strategica game. So with that manual that grew and all the different rules and the simplicity of the concepts of the rules, and so it's been really, really a longer process, I guess, than those 3 actual development years.
All right. And another point that I wanted to clarify for people listening to us, in terms of the match style in Lion War, is it always 1v1, or are there opportunities for 2v2, 3v3, and so on?
So, right now we only support 1v1, but the topmost priority of all features in Lion War after release is to add 2v2, 3v3, and free for all to that list. So there is nothing that is more prioritized than those three.
We've gathered feedback from players, and that is probably 90% overwhelmingly pointing to there. And then so that also, when we spoke about the single player experience, even if that will come at a later point, we're definitely prioritizing the additional multiplayer modes first. One thing we have to be careful with is every decision we make to make it into different play modes. So adding team play is important because so many people want it. But also, we're not going to try to involve or create a lot of diverging game modes. So like, it would be cool if you only allow this type of maps, or every filter you add on a game will split the player pool and fragment it. And for us, it's really, really important to keep a player pool that is strong with a lot of equally skilled players that are matched against each other. I think that's another, if we're speaking about game design and stuff, it's so easy to get tempted to create all these cool game modes that sound fun, but every time you do that decision, it could potentially damage the core play of the game. So we'll probably look at more options in the future.
All right. So I do have a few kind of logistic related questions for both of you, but before we kind of get into the wrap up, anything else regarding the design or gameplay of Line War that we didn't touch on that you guys would like to mention?
No, I think we covered a lot.
One thing I can add, which is a bit of something we've reflected on a lot when we play. We sort of think we're onto something, because when you lose against someone, especially like when I lose against Christian or something, I have nightmares of why I did not win, or what could I have done differently. And we often joke about that, and we get to a point where I think there was one match that me and Christian was playing, and I could not win. I could even start in the most ridiculous location or the best, or Christian could swap it, and I just could not win. And it got to the point where I got so frustrated and worked up that I had to take a day off just to calm down. So I think just the fact that the game can affect you. I had an experience like that with Tetris 20 years ago or 25 years ago, where I was dreaming about it. So I really like that side of Line War. And there's not. I've played a lot of games through the years and stuff. But when I get a chance to play the game in that sense, and since it's offering so many different type of matches. So if you think of a chessboard, it's got the 64 squares, and there's like so many different games that can play out on that. And we've got about the same amount of units, but randomized worlds and this whole thing. So it's I'm really excited to see what sort of matches. Excuse me, that we get coming out. So I'm hoping to see some good content.
Yeah, I think I want to add also to that. We haven't spoken a lot about esports, but we have created the game from the very, very beginning with esports in mind. So we already have this leaderboard set up that used a ranking algorithm that's pretty good. And we're gonna have seasons, and we might even cooperate with an esports arena here in Stockholm, one of the biggest in the world actually, called Space. Where we might have the playoffs and things like that. So and we want to find proper narrators and commentators and streamers on Twitch, so the game gets exposed properly. So that so we're really looking into the esports segment and seeing the potential of Line War there. With the match being only the typical match duration is like 30 minutes, maybe. We were worried that it might land on 1.5 hour at some point, but it looks like it's the average is around 30 minutes, and some matches can take 1 hour, but they are still very interesting to watch. So that's very important for us.
I'm happy you mentioned the match time, because that was literally going to be the next question I was going to ask you guys, so you beat me to it. Trying to think if there's anything else that I want to bring up, other than kind of like the wrap-up questions. But yeah, it definitely sounds interesting, and as like speaking as an RTS fan myself, like I've been looking for a more modern one to play, and it's definitely been slim pickings. I think the last, like, I guess, quote unquote, new RTS game that I liked was Sins of the Solar Empire, and that was kind of like space, kind of like quasi 4X meets RTS. And it is a genre that has certainly had its ups and downs in terms of design and even its audience these days. I know right now a lot of people are playing Age of Empires 4. I know there's definitely excitement around Company of Heroes 3. I'm sure there's other developers who are trying to do their own thing in this space, just like you guys are. So I guess before we do like, kind of like the wrap up, I just want to give you guys both a chance. Like, what are your thoughts on the RTS genre today? And I guess how did that kind of like inspire you to make Line War?
Yeah, I can start on that one. I think we didn't set out to make a specific genred type of game. It was more like we were going to try to put a label on it, because we decided to create a strategy game that had all the elements that we wanted to play. With the visual commands, with the type of resources and stuff. And then it wasn't until we were actually going to start creating the website and say, okay, so what type of game is this? Oh, well, it's this much RTS, this much RTT, and auto battler. Oh, yeah, it's 4X. And we don't want to try to define a new genre or something, but we really had a difficult time to slot it in. And at the same time, it was, I forget the name now, Frost something. There was what, sorry?
Frost Giants.
Oh yeah, they were getting together. I think I saw something last year, and when they had a discussion to sit and discuss what the next type of big RTS should be from their perspective, they're going. So a lot of the stuff that we heard was more factions, higher speed, more units, faster pace, grander scale, and stuff. And for us, it's always been about this experience of being able to. We compare it a little bit to chess sometimes, where you should be able to sit back, understand everything that's going on, and have a good experience and strategically do it. But maybe that's just more because that's the type of game we want to play, and there are obviously a huge numbers of players that prefer those type of games. But finally, just wanted to say that I'm hoping that we can attract even from board games. Maybe there's board game players that want to have a computerized experience and enjoy it online. And maybe there are RTS players that want to have a little bit pulled back on the pace. So we're hoping to be able to, or 4X that want to have a little bit more of the strategic. So I think we're hoping to gather a lot of different players from the different spaces. But it's cool that it's also a lot of stuff that is happening. We're seeing a lot of videos coming with new strategy games coming. So I think it's really good that it's waking up a lot more recently. I think it's good.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. It was a very good summary, and I've played. I also come from an RTS and strategy games background. Some of the games that had a huge impression on me was Master of Orion, the first game by Sid Meier. You also have the classics, of course, Dune 2, Warcraft 2. I was actually, I have to mention this. Is that okay, Stefan? I was number one ranked on a leaderboard called Cases Ladder. I think the website is still there. But I tried to search on my nickname, which is the same I have today. So I was number one on Cases Ladder in Warcraft 2 for like 2 days. And that might have been in 1993 or something. Just need to mention that. But anyway, yeah, I have an RTS background as well. I played most of the classics. But I never had the intention with this game design it naturally brings something new to the table, but it's not. This game vision came to mind when I played Strategica, and I started thinking about if it was possible to port the game to a PC RTS version. But I never, even though I have played a lot of RTS games, I never. The idea was never to bring to compete with the other titles or compete with the genre or something. I always intended just to be a game on its own merits.
All right. Yeah, and I definitely see a lot of potential here, and I'm going to hopefully try to get a chance to play the demo. And of course, for people listening to us right now, the demo for Line War is still available on Steam, correct?
Yeah, for a moment, we're actually approaching the launch very shortly now, 5th of May. So at some point, we'll pull the demo off just to make sure that the server park and everything's up and running with the release of the game. But it's still available depending on when this airs. I'm not sure, but it'll be available for some time still with a demo. So.
All right. So to wrap things up for our discussion, I just have a few kind of logistic related questions I said for both of you. So the first one, for people listening to us, what is the release date for Line War?
Yeah, so it's the 5th of May coming up. So that's a Steam release, fully on Steam at this point. That's where we're releasing the only channel at the moment.
All right. And when it comes out, is it going to be out like at 1.0, or are you going to put into early access?
Yeah,
It's 1.0.
Yeah, it's going to be our first proper release. And for some of them who've been following us for a longer period of time, we should touch on the subject because originally, maybe a year and a half ago, we were really heading down the early access route. That was before we had any of the alpha players nearly on the road as well. Mm-hmm. And now that we had the demo with the Next Fest and we've had over 35,000 matches played, we felt that because you could stay basically in theory, we want to add the technologies, we want to evolve the game, we want to eventually lift the graphics and add more type of modes and maybe even map editors and stuff. And we were thinking, when is the right time in that case to exit from early access? And we've also learned, this is our first Steam game that we're actually releasing, and we've learned a lot along the journey. We're trying to figure out how the release mechanisms work, how do people in general look at, maybe it was more, I think it was more popular a bit before to have early access games. It's becoming more of maybe people aren't so willing to buy it because it's early access, and we felt that we've got a game that we've enjoyed playing ourselves, 500, 600, 700 matches, just me and Christian alone, and on all of these matches. So we really want to be able to release it and encourage everyone who wants to play a multiplayer game of this type to play against each other, just to increase the chances of people finding, because it's best enjoyed when you're played against someone who's equally matched as well. And then we have a long-term vision for Line War for years to come, where we're going to add the different type of modes. We want to add the technologies. We want to arm a lot for lifting the graphical sides and the performance. And maybe we're looking at some Mac alternatives and Linux builds and things. So there's so many ideas that we have. So we wanted to go for a proper release instead of early access for that reason.
All right. So you kind of answered a few of my other questions as well in terms of what you guys have planned and other platforms. So trying to think if there's anything else really fast. But yeah, it definitely sounds like you guys have a lot here with Line War. And again, like, we are recording this in the middle of April right now for people listening. So I definitely want to wish you guys the best of luck with the May release.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks. We're excited about this.
Yeah,
it's going to be fun.
And we're in this for the long run, really. So we will continue developing this game for years to come, at least 2 or 3 years, very dedicated.
Yeah.
So we hope it will be a success at launch.
All right. Yeah. So to end the cast, I guess first off, do you guys have any social media, anything you would like to plug now? I'll include links, of course, to the store page down below, but for people listening. But anything else?
Yeah, so Line War is, if you search for Line War on YouTube, we've got a main channel that's got some of the content. It's got some tips and tricks videos and also some tutorials that are coming that way. So Line War on YouTube, just search for it's probably the easiest way. There's also a Twitter account, and we're just posting some updates that really. Our main focal point for the game is going to be the Line War Steam page. That's where we'll be releasing most of the information. We also have linewar.com, which is the main site for the game as well.
All right. So my final question then for both of you, do you have anything you'd like to say to the fans who may be listening to us to end the cast on?
Yeah, I hope to get beaten by most of you guys, because I think if you give Line War a chance and start to play it, and especially if you find some friends to play with, you'll probably find yourself being quite verbal sometimes with the dialogues and stuff. And I should mention as well, I have to mention this, Christian, since you mentioned the ladder thing, that every time I start to win in Line War, Christian always finds a good way to nerf the units. No, I'm only joking. I think it's just my way of playing the game is, ooh, this could be a good combination, and I'll just go all in on it. And then it's actually quite natural that you see that, okay, this was a little bit overpowered. So over the years now, we found a really good balance, and Christian beats me most of the time.
That's a very good way to achieve great balance over time. to try and find the next exploit.
Yeah. I'm pretty good at that, trying to do it, because that's how I have to do that to try to win.
There you go.
No, but just excited to see a lot of people playing the game and having fun with it. That's what I was trying to say.
All right. Anything you want to add, Christian?
No, thank. I'm happy to be here, and happy that we could join you for this chat and interview. It was great.
Sounds good. And hopefully after the release, if you guys have more time, we can certainly have you back on, maybe do something live and talk a little bit more about kind of like how the community is finding the game now that, you know, it's out and you get a lot more eyes and ears on it.
Yeah,
definitely. It sounds fun. We'd be happy to come back.
Yeah, me too.
All right. So, with that said, we're going to wrap up this week's episode of the Receptive Podcast. For everyone watching this recording, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, do the liking, subscribing, and commenting people tell you to do. You'll find links to my Twitter, Discord, and Patreon down below, as well as up there on the overlay. If you are a developer working on an upcoming game or just want to talk design with me, feel free to reach out. I'm always looking for new guests. And again, check out the Discord. You'll hang out and talk about games, as well as my books on design. Everything is listed down below. So again, Christian and Stefan, thank you again for coming on. Best of luck with the release of Line War, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again in the future.
All right.
Thank you
Thanks
so
a
much.
lot.
Thanks. Nice to meet you.
You as well. So, once again, for everyone watching, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until our next chat, have a great night. Take care.